intriguing, Mr. Mayor, that with no election statement of intent, how did they ever get through Parliament? The Liberals haven't won a general election since 1910. The Tories haven't won a general election since 1992. The poor Lib Dems have never won a general election and never will. But cohabiting with the Tories, Mr. Mayor, this illegitimate bedroom tax is what they spawned, and now they have the impertinence to offer an amendment that distances them from it as if their government wasn't behind it in the first place. The Lib Dems, Mr. Mayor, are every bit as guilty as their Tory friends on this issue. What spectacular hypocrisy, Mr. Mayor, what spectacular hypocrisy for the Lib Dems to take the position that they've been taking. In passing, and only in passing, let me observe that the banks and the hedge fund businesses didn't cause the conditions that made this crash inevitable, that they're having this austerity measure for. Recession and slump, Mr. Mayor, is just a built-in function of unplanned economies. Boom and slump is in fact how they do work. If I go back a little, just as a matter of curiosity. Well, I'll end on this note then if I get a little bit. Just as a matter of curiosity, even when I was still a youngish political economy lecturer in the 70s and 80s, I directed my own students to the work of a very well-known research academic at the time, who set out exactly why this sort of crash could not be avoided, with his timeless expression that the Western economies are sailing inexorably to disaster on a sea of bank debt. Can anyone tell me who that was? Well, I'll tell you, it was Professor Ralph Miliband. And the Tories love to hate.
That's very moving. And I remind members there's quite a lot of wish to speak, so please stick to the winter.
Thank you, I thought I'd just give you an example of one of the constituents that is very, very close to here and how this has affected that individual and the effect that it's having on the rest of the economy, really. This is a lady who's lived in a two-bedroom house for many years in North family. Her family have all moved away. This person suffers with mental health issues, bipolar and agoraphobia. The agoraphobia being she doesn't like to leave the house. Obviously she's on housing benefits and she's on the benefits. The bedroom tax means she's expected to pay an extra £24 a week. Okay, so she gets discretionary housing benefit, which means she has to pay £10 a week. So she has to pay £40. The stress of all this has caused her to threaten to commit suicide. Now the fact that she's on suicide watch means that the paramedics are always available for this woman. The medical staff, the police and the fire are always available and can call to her property on numerous times because she's threatened to commit suicide. This is the cumulative effect that we're not calculating, and this is one individual. There are two other councillors on this side of the house that have had constituents commit suicide because of the effect of what's happening with the benefit changes. We need to look at individuals. This is affecting poor people dreadfully, and we need to really start looking and thinking about not the greater good, but how it's affecting individuals. Because the bill for this is going to be bigger than what we save by a long shot.
I've called Councillor Andrew Hodgson. Do you want to speak? That's to you, please, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, the title bedroom tax can be considered a misnomer because what is known as the bedroom tax is actually a tax. Rather, it's a reduction in housing benefits as a proportion of rent for those working age males who have at least one spare bedroom in their accommodation, and this is a spare room subsidy. Up to now, people living in social housing have no bedroom-based restrictions placed on the amount of housing benefits to which they were entitled, nor on the size of accommodation they could inhabit. People who lived in rented properties in the private sector and are on benefits only receive the benefits they're entitled to for their needs. If they want a larger property, they either have to pay the difference themselves or move to another area or to a smaller property they can afford. So why should we not work in the social housing sector? You talk about the learner standard. That should be fair. Mr. Mayor, this government has to deal with a number of different but related problems inherited from the previous government. A massive budget deficit, a welfare system that was out of control, including housing benefit that went through the roof, increasing from £11.2 billion in 1970 to £20 billion in 2009, a rise of nearly 80%. And under the Labour housing building, of since 1924. In 2010, there were only 113,617 completions in total, and social housing stock had fallen by 421,000 from March 97 to March 2010. This resulted in 2 million households in England on waiting lists for housing, and 250,000 families living in over 386,000 households in the social sector who are under-occupied. Mr. Mayor, in August 2010, Ed Miliband admitted that we, Labour, refused to prioritise the building of new social housing. And if Labour had won the last election, Gordon Brown in the election campaign also admitted that Labour would slash the housing investment. His belief was housing is essentially a private sector activity, and he confirmed he did not see the need for the big renovation programme. And at that point, Labour was talking about reforming housing benefits and under-occupied social housing, but as usual, did nothing. Also at that time, in fact on the 2nd of January 2012, Liam Byrne, Labour former Chief Secretary to the Treasurer, and you remember him, Mr. Mayor, he's the one who left the note, there is no money left. He actually also said Beveridge would scarcely believe housing benefits alone was costing the UK over £20 billion a year. To clear up the Labour's mess, the government is reducing housing benefit for households deemed to under-occupy bedrooms while at the same time protecting those most vulnerable. The changes will not allow to apply to claimants who qualify age for state pension, credit, foster parents and carers, and the disabled will be allowed an additional room, as will severely disabled children. Those serving in the armed forces will also be affected by these changes. And let's not forget the government is also providing housing payments. 155 billion 2013 to 2014, 125 billion for 2014-2015 to support vulnerable claimants such as those with long-term mental conditions that would create difficulties in sharing a bedroom. Ultimately, of course, the answers are building new homes, getting people into work and off benefits, including housing benefits. We have reinvigorated the right to buy, introducing the new homes bonus to boost house building, and are investing £9.5 billion of public and private money in an affordable housing, whilst housing construction activity is growing at the fastest pace for almost a decade. Once again, the Conservative-led government is having to make the difficult decisions to make the best use of limited resources and bring fairness to the welfare system and build the houses we need, whilst the Labour Party that failed to deal with the problem and told us there is no money left now sits on the sidelines, cynically criticising. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Members, please sit down. I now go to call the seconders on this particular amendment. There is another amendment to deal with later. I will try and call members who haven't spoken previously. The now can I call the second. Councillor Kelly,
thank you, Mr. Mayor. Paul Davis, in moving the Labour motion, said that, in his opinion, this was the wrong solution to the problem of under-occupation. And I can't say that I agree with it. I think that statement says a lot. First of all, it acknowledges that there is a problem with under-occupation, as there is a problem with over-occupation of the sector. So identifying a problem is one identified in his remarks building new houses, clearly new houses of the right size to accommodate the demographic as well as the issue. I would add to that, if I may, that I also think that bringing empty homes back into use would also fall into that category. Both Phil and Adrian Jones suggested to my group that we're hypocrites or hypocritical in some way to make our views known locally. Well, I reject entirely that accusation. It is not unusual in this chamber for members to act independently of their national parties and in the interests of local communities. Members will be aware of the other paper that I've seconded this motion in place of Councillor Hamilton to this unwell. So let me give an example that she might have used in this debate. I didn't notice Labour councillors queuing up to praise the invasion of Iraq under the last Labour government. And quite rightly so, because the last Labour government was rotten. And people in this chamber said so without fear or favour. And in the future, if it does transpire that a future Labour-led government is indeed tougher on welfare than the Conservatives, I would expect that Labour locally would act and say something and not act in the interests of that government. In his remark, asked for an immediate scrapping of the government subsidy. Is he just referring to subsidy as it relates to social sector? Does he also include the private sector rules that he was touched on in his demand? Immediately, all of a sudden, becomes an easy way for the opposition to use. Well, at the end of the day, if it was just the social sector, then private tenants would likely be able to ask the question, why not us? Okay, the problem of under-occupancy and over-occupancy is clearly required policy response from governments. That response, in my view, has been too heavily influenced by the problems that seem to exist in housing in the south, and particularly in the southeast of the country, and far too many of the policies that any government, Labour and Conservative, have pursued, seem to be through this prism of the southwest and London in particular. So it is right that councils of the northwest say what they think without fear or favour. Okay, just moving on, just as I've raised the issue of the private sector subsidy, which we haven't addressed or criticised much for, and there's a legitimate criticism to be made, because when that was introduced by the last Labour government, it wasn't introduced retrospectively. Now, in my view, if you're going to have a policy response to the problem of housing benefits in the social sector because of under-occupancy, the way you don't really to have introduced this, if you were going to aid the policies that were introduced by the Labour Party in the private sector, is not to do it retrospectively. In other words, as you're offering the social sector housing to people, you have to say, look, in our view, this would be too large a house and you would not therefore be entitled to that as well. That's what happens in the private sector. The mistake in my view that the government has made today, the mistake the government has made is the retrospective nature of it. I also have to say that I'm interested in the so-called Fife judgment. Should we be taking the landlord's word for it in terms of the size of the houses? Whether that's in the private sector or dealing with quite like it's concerned, we don't have the same level of control over the social sector any longer. So perhaps really we should be dealing with it in the same way as we deal with private sector landlords and check our understanding of bedroom and bedroom size. And I wonder at some point whether we will get a local response on that. Finally, let me just agree with much of what Ian Lewis had to say in recognising the problems of uprooting people, damaging settled communities in this way. And I think it's the retrospective nature or the non-retrospective nature.
Please, I ask you to wind up now.
Well, I said it. My view is this: all amendments improve the Labour notice of motion. Okay, that's my view. The Labour notice of motion on its own needed to be amended, perhaps typically needed to be amended, so that it focused on the issue. The Labour notice of motion as it stands, I can't support, but I would ask Council to support our amendment.
one of the other things as well, Doctor. There has been a real life reform project. Pat, I've made a comment about it before. NHC. I've done a research on this. And I'd just like to spend my 3 minutes giving the outcome of that report. So from the first, it was launched on the 1st of July, and it's been in a real world for 18 months. And it basically says that 7 housing providers should